The #1 song in Trinidad and Tobago, speaking about Little Black Boy, the reigning monarch of Trinidad and Tobago. Name of the song, Unity. Let's welcome Winston Peters, the Gypsy.
Hey, hey. What does it take to unite a multiracial nation where our history shows up great divisions of the past? And there are those who for years have seen themselves as powerless. Now they have finally attained the power they seek at last. Now would there ever be a distribution of equity that's fair? Or would there be this attitude of self-preservation and I don't care? I am just warning if that is so. It would not be the way to go, else there would be a fracture and tear. A gulf wide enough that time and all can't repair. And it's gonna take a long time, I know. It's gonna take a lot of time to grow. And then it's gonna take time, it's gonna take love, it's gonna take trust. And it's gonna take you, it's gonna take me, it's gonna take all of us. But it's gonna take a long time, I know. Oh yeah. Yeah. All actions must eradicate traces of alienation. If we are serious about one love and a change in our nation, we must not expect meaningful change to come about overnight. Cause any change for the better of anything takes a lot of fight. And any agenda has to be transparent, it cannot be disguised. You cannot speak one thing and your action speaks otherwise. Then unity would be just a fast. No such hypocrisy ever lasts. And you would be taken to task. Then reality would lash you furious and fast. And it's gonna take a long time, I know. It's gonna take a lot of time to grow. And then it's gonna take time, it's gonna take love, it's gonna take trust. Most of all, it's gonna take you, it's gonna take me, it's gonna take all of us. But it's gonna take a long time, I know. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. All right. You must never practice the things that in the past you criticize. Cause if you do, it just helps to leave this nation more traumatized. And there's nothing worse than mistrust to create real division. And the last thing unity wants is total polarization. No political oligarchy should ever be allowed to develop. And racism, no matter how disguised, would have to stop. Don't make unity a puppy show. Just remember I told you so. It would not be the way to go. Else the darkest cloud would cover up our rainbow. And it's gonna take a long time, I know. It's gonna take a lot of time to grow. But then it's gonna take time, it's gonna take love, it's gonna take trust. And it's gonna take you, it's gonna take me, it's gonna take all of us. It's gonna take a long time, I know. It's gonna take a lot of time to grow. And it's gonna take time, it's gonna take trust. And then it's gonna take you, it's gonna take me, it's gonna take all of us. It's gonna take a long time, I know. It's gonna take longest time to grow. I know. It's gonna take the Indian, the Chinese, the African, and the Syrian man, and everyone who stayed at home to them is this blessed land. It's gonna take, 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 it's gonna take. Well, it's gonna take love, it's gonna take trust. It's gonna take you, it's gonna take me, it's gonna take all of us. Past you criticize, cause it takes a lot of fight. And any agenda has to be transparent, it cannot be disguised. You cannot speak one thing and your action speaks otherwise. Then unity would be just a fast. No such hypocrisy ever lasts. And you would be taken to task. Then reality would lash you furious and fast. And it's gonna take a long time, I know. It's gonna take a lot of time to grow. And then it's gonna take time, it's gonna take love, it's gonna take trust. Most of all, it's gonna take you, it's gonna take me, it's gonna take all of us. But it's gonna take a long time, I know. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. All right. You must never practice the things that in the past you criticize. Cause if you do, it just helps to leave this nation more traumatized. And there's nothing worse than mistrust to create real division. And the last thing unity wants is total polarization. No political oligarchy should ever be allowed to develop. And racism, no matter how disguised, would have to stop. Don't make unity a puppy show. Just remember I told you so. It would not be the way to go. As the darkest cloud would cover up our rainbow. And it's gonna take a long time, I know. It's gonna take a lot of time to grow. But then it's gonna take time, it's gonna take love, it's gonna take trust. And it's gonna take you, it's gonna take me, it's gonna take all of us. It's gonna take a long time, I know. It's gonna take a lot of time to grow. And it's gonna take trust. And then it's gonna take you, it's gonna take me, it's gonna take all of us. It's gonna take long time, I know. It's gonna take long time to.
Oh, wow. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101 on a Tuesday evening. My God, I am so glad that I am a West Indian. I'm so glad I'm Guyanese. I'm so glad that I'm Black. When I listen to these men and women who, without much formal schooling, are able to reflect accurately the condition. Historical memory is part of our condition in the Caribbean. We have to depend on historical memory to bring to life a past that has been so sordid. And these singers, these chanters, they take us back in history, but they do something else. They look into the future. Winston Peters, the Gypsy, perhaps his most famous song, most famous calypso, Little Black Boy. He won the crown in 1997 with that calypso. It was controversial at the time. Some people felt he was too hard on young Black men. Some people felt it was appropriate, but that's what the calypso is all about, is to get us thinking. But here is Gypsy. I think he would have sung this song about 20 years ago. My God, is he so accurate about Guyana today? That's what I mean when I say look into the future. Look into the future. Listen to the lyrics of that calypso. Is that Guyana today? I think so. Welcome to Politics 101. All of you are joining us. Please share the link. Please share the link. Please share the link. Please share the link. Political oligarchies can't have unity with that. You can't preach today what you condemned yesterday. You can't talk about political unity without equity. Winston Peters, the gypsy, the calypsonian, the griot, our mother music in the English-speaking Caribbean, telling stories, our stories, our stories, our stories. We are in interesting times. I've had cause to, this morning I was on a radio program in Antigua talking about the visit of the Gladstones and so on. And I was making the point that in some regard, it took some white people to come here to make some of us understand the definitive nature of slavery. That you can't talk about anything in our Caribbean after 1492 without centering slavery. And it took some white people to come in to say, but slavery is profound. It is so profound that we as a family are coming here to apologize to you, to say that the wealth and the prominence that we have in British society, it is because of unpaid labor and what we did to your people, white folks. And then all of a sudden, people discover that slavery is profound. It is profound. It is the only system of its nature. You take away slavery from the Caribbean, from the Americas, from the world. European wealth. Modern capitalism. Eric Williams, in his famous book, Capitalism and Slavery. He's writing that almost 100 years ago. But you see, if we center slavery, then the narratives of Europe will have to change. If the European states recognize and they do what the Gladstones are doing, if the American state, if the Guyana state, contemporary state, were to do that, narratives will have to change. For the Europeans, all this talk that our wealth had to do with our genius, our exceptionalism, our hard work, all that narrative of 400 years, the American exceptionalism, it will have to go. They will have to admit that they are wealthy because for 400 years, they paid not one damn cent for labor. The whole narrative will have to change. And they will have to admit that African people were always human beings. And they will have to admit that African people are entitled. You know, they like to say, you all behave as though you're entitled to something. Of course. If you're not paid for 4 centuries, of course you're entitled to be paid. Narratives will have to change. It's okay for our government in Guyana to say that Europeans must pay us reparations, but that not the successor state in Guyana, that they must have nothing to do with reparations. How about if the state of Guyana and the state of Trinidad and Jamaica start by putting the study of the Black experience, the study of slavery, as central to our school curriculum. How about starting there? That's going to be big reparations. How about if the University of Guyana set up a department of African and African diaspora study? That would be big reparations. The state of Guyana and the other states in the Caribbean, it's okay. They're talking about Europe oil reparations. They can begin reparations now. Starting with education. How about spending money on research into the health of African people in Guyana? Diabetes and all the other ills that come with us from enslavement. How about taking some of that oil money and putting it in research to deal with some of these health afflictions that are devastating the Black community? It's going to take you, it's going to take me, it's going to take all of us. I'm saying without any water in my mouth, until Guyana and the African diaspora come to grips that we are all living in a post-slave society, a post-slavery society that is only post-slavery in form, but not in content. All the kind of talking about twinning, indentureship is slavery. No. Indentureship itself is a derivative. It is a rejection of the slave logic. The slavery logic said that people are now emancipated. They should become full citizens, earning a livable wage. And indentureship itself came into being as a rejection of that. How can you tell me the two are the same? Oh my God! Until the Americas and the world come to that consciousness that the uniqueness of enslavement makes those who were the victims and are still the victims make their story unique. The nation state as a construct cannot explain the ethnic conditions of its people. In many regards, as Africans in Guyana, we have more in common with Africans in Brazil and Africans in Jamaica and Africans in America and Africans on the continent than we have with our ethnic brothers and sisters. We share with our ethnic brothers and sisters the state, our nation, our cultural nation is shared with our brothers and sisters who underwent that heinous crime. 1823 is known for the largest slave rebellion in terms of the number of enslaved people who were involved, but it's also known for the most brutal. Over 200 of our foreparents had their heads chopped up, put on stakes, and paraded. The epitome, the extremity of slave violence. And then you tell me about one Guyana? One Guyana has to recognize the uniqueness of each experience. But among the uniqueness of each experience, there is an experience that is most unique. I say no more. They're going to report me and say that I'm preaching racism. I grew up hearing old people, my auntie and them, my grandmother and them saying, where ignorance is bliss. And you all know the rest. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101. We're doing it tonight. My guest, brother, Nigel Hughes. I like how Simona Brooms put it. We liar. Use we liar. That will live with me for the rest of my life. I will remember that for the rest of my life. Use we liar. And when poor people, oppressed people say we, it's a deeper meaning. They deny Brother Nigel and continue to deny him. Successive governments, the silk, the senior council. But that day when Simone and them lady tell him, use we liar, that is a higher accolade than any senior council. It's we liar. So we're going to have we liar tonight. Because he raised a hornet's nest at Coffee 250 annual conference. He argued for a super majority as a means not of taking away anybody power, but as a means of equalizing power in an equitable way. And seeing that as a route, R-O-U-T-E, to national reconciliation. Because, my God, we not, look, even with this oil, we aren't going no way if we don't have national reconciliation. And national reconciliation has to be built on a recognition of the victimhood of all of us. And you have to start with the victimhood of those who were most victimized. I'm not an expert on Black people, but I think I know something about Black people because I remain close to them. And I think if you watch them in their eyes and say, we recognize your victimhood, we recognize your pain, we recognize your grief. Let me go down the road together. They will go down the road with you. But Guyana is still, in a human way, to recognize the grief and the pain and the victimhood of the African. The African leaders are demonized every day. Why? Just because they say Black people have been victimized. They're called racist. And those who call them racist know the real meaning of racist. So they don't mean that we believe in racial superiority. What they mean when they tell us we're racist is that we are lesser human beings. That's the definition of racism in Guyana in a lot of quarters, including some Black quarters. When a Black man sits on television and says Black people must take responsibility for their children, I wince. A people who took responsibility for the world by working for them for nothing. Family destroyed, but still all in the family together. That Nigel and me and all the rest of us, we came out of families. Our families took responsibilities for us. That is why we were able to wriggle our way through the creases and escape bondage so that we can come back and try to make those creases into larger cracks. Ultimately, to open the door, and then a Black man would sit there and talk to Black people about taking responsibility for their children. If the men didn't take responsibility for us, the women took responsibility for us. If the mother and the father didn't, for whatever reason, the grandmothers and grandfathers, what are you telling me? Let me welcome Brother Nigel. Brother Nigel, good evening.
David, good night. As always, profound. And allow me again publicly, I do this every time I am in the same space as you, to thank you for the work that you continue to do for the African and Guyanese community. It's not one community that you speak to or about. You're always preaching reconciliation and love. So allow me to publicly thank you for that.
And thank you, my brother. You are obviously there in Guyana, looking on, watching on, observing the visit of the Gladstones, mixed response from the community, from the Black community, from the larger Guyanese community, the rest of the Caribbean is taking notice. Like I said, I was on in Antigua this morning talking about it. Your response, your response.
Um, David, as you know, reparations is a really difficult emotional topic. And when you think that there are people who are opposed to it in this day and age, it says a lot. I think the Gladstones, I don't wish to amplify uh, this gesture of theirs. I think it is a good beginning. It is a first half step. Um, but you've got to remember the Gladstones came at the weekend. And guess who came 3 days later? Tony Blair.
Tony Blair.
Okay, so let's get this in context. I want to applaud the University of Guyana for being the forum where they went to make their apology. I want to commend the work that people like Eric Phillips have put in for a long time on the issue of reparations. So I think it's a good beginning. You touched on something when you were doing your introduction that really I think highlighted why education should be a big part of reparations, as in funding for education. You mentioned that there was some African person, I believe he was male, who said that Black people must take responsibility for their children. Like you said, if we could come through 2.5 centuries of the worst form of depravity, and like you said, it's the women who have always been there, have sacrificed, not now, not my grandparents, before that, to keep those communities together. You can't really, in this day and age, say that Black people must take responsibility for the children. But you know what? It does point out, because I'm assuming it's somebody of some significance in the
Yes,
society.
is Minister of Labor, Mr. Joe Hamilton. He was in a conversation on Globe Span with Vincent Alexander. First time I saw Vincent got vexed in public. And I think vexed at all. But anyhow, yes, it's Mr. Hamilton. Sorry.
But you know what it does highlight, and I'm surprised that somebody like Joe Hamilton would say so, even despite his political leanings. If you had real education about the history of the Black person anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, you would understand the context of where we are now, where we came from, and it wouldn't even arise as a wild thought to suggest that the African people don't take responsibility for their children. It is unheard of. And it's sad, but what I have noticed recently is that a lot of young people either don't want to, and I'm talking about the young African people, either don't want to know about the history, maybe because it's too painful, or they just don't care. And, you know, Bob Marley said it, all he did is repeat what a lot of our foreparents said. If you don't know your history, you don't know who you are. It's, you know, it's sad, 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 sad. But we battle on.
We battle on. We battle on. Nigel, I know because I've been associating with you now for the better part of 2 decades, and I've been talking to you, and you've been talking in public. You've been thinking and about a lot of the issues that have to do with reconciliation and nationhood. And you do so, except for a brief moment when you were chairman of the AFC, you do so outside of formal politics. And I have to stress that because I admit that those of us who are in the formal political system, every now and again, even against our best intentions, the party thing sometimes get in the way. And the reason I listen to you always is because you don't carry that burden, like I said, except for a brief moment. And so at the Coffee 250 thing, you suggested this super majority. It's not new. It's been suggested in Guyana before, but it sounded fresh. It
Hmm.
sounded fresh to me. Even as a person who's been involved in this power sharing thing, in activism, in part of my scholarship, and so it still sounded fresh. So I'm gonna ask you, you know, um, how did the spirit move in you to come to that in 2023?
David, let me again. Sounds as if we're singing your praises all night. Coffee 250. I have to commend them for putting that forum together every year. And if you, I think if we all honest, every time Coffee 250 at their annual August convention, every time they hold it, they always raise issues that have to be discussed, open, controversial, but that's the reason why they're raised. So last year, when all that you said was, "Are we heading to an apartheid state?" and everybody tried to bring down the heavens on you. This year, I was lucky, privileged to have been the person who spoke about this supermajority. David, you're an old political activist. I used to run behind you and Rodney and stuff as a kid in school. And it was since then people recognized the fact that this country could not be governed by one side alone. And I think what they were saying in effect then, because in those days, the majority of the persons who were in the country were clearly Indian, what they were saying was, we, as a country, we can't move forward with one hand clapping or with one hand determining the political fortunes of the country. Since then, that was the essence of what the WPA was saying. It might not have been articulated in terms of supermajority, etc., etc. And one of the facts that we have to discuss, both in the African community and in the larger Guyanese community, is the concept of self-defense politically. And if you know from experience that you are going to be tortured or you are going to be treated badly or you're going to be disadvantaged, and someone asks you, would you subscribe to this process that will result in that treatment of you? Your natural instinct put in that context is say, of course not. So let's put it in the context of democracy. And this is a discussion I think we all need to have about Mr. Burnham, because of course, we have criticized Mr. Burnham, rigging elections, etc. And not for one second am I attempting to justify it. Because like you, I protested it. But the reality is that part of the reality that he had to deal with was the fact that he didn't have the numbers in his African community to allow him to defend them if democracy brought into place a government that was hostile to them. And that is something we don't discuss because it quite often gets clouded as anti-democratic, etc. And that's one of the things we need to discuss, because if you are, you say you're elected, you've got whatever 50.1, 51%, whatever it is, and you then proceed by your conduct to act in ways which are hostile to segments of your population, what do you think they're going to do? They are placed into a self-defense mode. And it is just a question of mechanics, how they defend themselves. Now, not for one second am I saying that democracy is not necessary, but you can't have democracy in a multi-ethnic society if you don't have structures in your constitution and elsewhere to protect the exploitation of minorities by a simple majority. You can't have it. And I mean, look at the results of, I think it's CAPE and CSAC. Not as an African person. Every time those results come out, you never see one single indigenous person, and I ain't coming to the Africans yet, in the top 10. You probably don't see an indigenous person in the top 20. You may or may not. Now, if you are living in a society in which all of us have equal access to education, we all supposed to be treated equally, and we could matriculate, etc., etc. Why is it that we never see indigenous people in the top 10? And if that continues to happen, it must mean that we as a society must take urgent remedial efforts to ensure that whatever it is that causes them never to be in that position, that those things are addressed. Because otherwise, we are literally sitting down saying it is okay for that segment of the population, 10, 12% of the population, never to be able to produce people who are regularly in the top 10. And that's a scary place. Now, I choose the Amerindian because that's an obvious example.
Mhm.
And this is where the whole argument, and I don't want to necessarily go there tonight, but this is the whole where this whole argument about disaggregated figures come about. And you touched on something, diabetes. If in the African community there's some disease that if you let's take a population sample of 10, and you say out of 10 people, 8 get a particular disease. And we got 5 ethnicities, you will say in theory,
We seem to we seem to have had some little difficulty there, brother Nigel. Got stuck.
hi
I
David.
think we're back in business now. Yes.
David, I'm not sure whether you can hear me. I say to your viewers, um, we apologize for that break. Yeah,
Yes,
here you
we're
go.
hearing you. We're hearing you. We're hearing you now. We're hearing you now. Go right ahead. Yes, I think you're in. Nigel, you can go ahead. There seems to be some bandwidth problem, but are you hearing me, Nigel? We seem to have some bandwidth problem there.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened.
yeah.
Yeah, I was giving an example. So we have, let's say, 10 people, and you have a particular disease that is affecting the population, and we have 5 ethnicities. In theory, that means the average is two per segment of the population. But if you are addressing the problem and all 10 or 9 of the 10, the victims of that particular disease are only in one community, then you don't spread the resources over all the communities. You spread the resources exactly where the problem exists. That's why disaggregated data is important. But to come back to your question about inclusion, so I was just giving the history and the context. From way back in the day, and certainly from the beginning of my political consciousness, that was always an underlying message. We now know for the first time, there was a long time in Guyana where people didn't want to discuss race and politics. It was taboo because everybody was talking about unity and one people and one nation and whatever you want. In the last 10 years, probably yes, race has come to the fore. There is not a discussion in Guyana that doesn't touch politics that goes straight to race. Before, it might have been impolite discussion. Now it's to the fore. It's as if we finally unmasked um, all the subliminal issues that existed and we are addressing it frontally. Um, we then look at the statistics, we look at all the data that's available, and it is evident that one sector of the community is clearly not being treated the same as another sector of the community. So the question is, we know for a fact now, before, when we were 20 years old and 30 years old, you could say we were aspiring for unity. Now we know for a fact that unity doesn't exist in Guyana. I'm not saying we shouldn't aspire to it, but it doesn't exist. Our political reality for 50 years has been division. That's a fact. Okay, so let's take that as a fact. The sun rises in the east every morning. Division is what we've had. We have come into wealth. So the question is going to be, how are we sharing the corn? We have to acknowledge we have division. We have to acknowledge that people get elected, and the people who don't support the party that gets elected always feel excluded. Fact of life. However you dress it up, the PPP is perceived as an Indian party. However you dress it up, the PNC is perceived as an African party. And that's our reality. We have experimented with other things, but that's where we come back to. So the question is, in a society in which we accept we're divided, how can we create the political architecture that would protect all the major ethnic groups so that they get an equal opportunity and they get equity as well? And the only way you can do that in an ethnically divided society is you can't say simple majority. As a matter of fact, under the Constitution in Guyana, you don't have to have a majority to be the government. Donald Ramatar's government was a minority government. So how can you have a constitution that says once you get the most votes, you get all the executive power? And you could the only restraint on that is at budget time when you go to Parliament to vote, the National Assembly to vote. So it is, I think it has spoken to us for a long time that what we need here is some sort of political architecture that allows the views of the major ones to participate. Some people call it power sharing. I just happen to say what we need is consensus. Like you said, it's not a new idea. The special committee that was convened when APNU AFC got into power, it was one of our recommendations. Yeah. As a matter of fact, recommendation number 59, we said consideration should be given to the establishment of the requirement for a supermajority where the proposed legislation may include provisions which create ethnic and cultural consequences. I want to go on to an actual example, and this is where Guyana really has to, I think, spend some time. We are in the middle of a oil and gas boom, unprecedented find. It means that we're, for example, the People's Progressive Party get in with 51% or whatever the percentage is, and they decide they want to undertake projects without feasibility studies, without any kind of background assessments and analysis, and they go down the road with that policy against the strenuous objection of the opposition, and the government changes. Some foreign investor comes and invests millions of dollars in a project. The government changes, and the project gets stalled. That's just our history. We had this precise scenario with Amelia Falls, because what the investors in Amelia Falls said, unless this is passed by a majority of the people, and not simple majority, the majority of the people in the National Assembly, i.e. a supermajority, we are not proceeding with this investment. It is too risky. And therefore, what that does is it increases the risk factor of investing in Guyana. Because if you're a serious foreign investor and you're dealing with a government that got a 51% majority, and there's a real chance that they're going to lose the next time and you had an opposition that was strenuously opposed to some project, the investor has to factor in that that project is going to runs the risk of not going anywhere. And therefore your risk factor goes up, your ratings go up, you pay more, and the society will continue this perpetual um, dance in which we really are spinning top in mud. So even from the economic point of view, before we even come to the ethnic relations, from an economic point of view, supermajorities are what are required. So if an investment is approved by 60% of the population of the National Assembly, the chances of that being reversed at a change of government are nil. The, I noted the immediate reaction of the Attorney General that this was trying to get power through the back door. The objective of power is really not to say that you have it, but it's to improve the society. I think Andai says it's to make the world a better place. Yeah. And you can't decide, well, you alone must exercise this power. This is power that has to be utilized for the benefit of the entire nation. Suriname, multi-ethnic society, more ethnicities than Guyana. Their president has to be elected by a 2/3 majority of the parliament because they recognize the disruption that comes when you end up with these ethnic governments that you had. And if you think of between 1992 and 2023, there was literally 3.5 years of any other government other than the PPP. What do you naturally expect the African people to believe? What is their investment in this system? And so, looking at it from a bird's eye view, and certainly looking at it internally, we have to have political architecture that says we got to reach a consensus by way of a supermajority. We could argue whether it's 55%, whether it's 60%. Suriname says for the president you should have 2/3. But if Suriname can make it work, Bouterse got elected 2/3 majority. Santoki had to get 2/3 majority. It restrains any instinct anybody may have to pander only to one ethnic community. Because you're not going to get 2/3 majority in the National Assembly if you suddenly get into government and all you're doing is providing for your own supporters.
Brother Nigel Hughes here tonight, walking us through his thinking with the supermajority. And I'm really drawn to the argument of investment because we don't often go there. Because there's a logic as you were thinking, as you were speaking and saying, but this makes eminent sense because an investor says, I can't guarantee that my investment will survive your politics of division. But the flip side of that is an investor may say, I'm going to invest, but I am going to make sure that there is continuity in government and then use funds to ensure that elections are bring out a particular result. And I'm going here to the regime change story.
David, I think you're frozen. I'm not sure if we have bandwidth.
Are you hearing me now, Nigel?
I'm hearing you now. Yeah, you're back.
Yeah. I was making the point that I'm drawn to your argument about investor because you're quite correct. An investor wants to know that his or her investment does not become the victim of your broken politics, your politics of division. But the investor can do something else. The investor can say, I have invested my money and my resources. I have an interest in continuity. And then that investor.
And you're coming to another very important recommendation, which is you have to have campaign finance legislation.
Yes.
Because if I award $50 billion and I look at Guyana's oil resources and I want to ensure that my man continues to control it because whatever benefits I'm getting in it, I come on, I bury a little 50 million in Guyana, buy the country. So so it's important. And what we also have to avoid is what happened in Venezuela, where you had perpetually for decades, you created this structured society where the rich were at the top. Venezuela had more private planes per capita than any other country when Chavez took over. And then you create the circumstances which will lead to a complete rejection of the status quo and serious social turmoil.
Brother Nigel Hughes here, walking us through the supermajority. Nigel, there was a swift response from the Attorney General, followed by the Vice President. And then we heard the President said a couple of days ago that he's not talking to Aubrey Norton. First, he wasn't talking to Mr. Harmon because Harmon didn't recognize his government. No, he's not talking to Aubrey because Aubrey didn't shake your hand. And I mean, all more ridiculous than you can get. But the three top people in the government are saying no. And then you drew my attention as become on air to an editorial in the Guyana Times. First of all, were you surprised at the government stance, even for a PPP that we know I've always responded to power sharing and shared government since it came to power in a certain way. But still, in this new era of oil and gas, in this new era of African sense of victimhood and African complaints, are you surprised that they so swiftly shut it down?
No, not at all. I expected that, because their perception of the purpose of power is to perpetuate themselves and their supporters. That's their approach. When you shred everything they do down to the data, that is the only purpose for them of power. Now, you mentioned a point. Whether you like Mr. Norton, don't like Mr. Norton, you're black, you're Indian, Mr. Norton is the leader of the party that has the second largest number of votes in the country. We could argue about rigging, but this is a man that has consistently, as leader, had the support of the African population. Now, the purpose of politics is not to like your adversaries. It is to come to arrangements that move the entire country forward. Mr. Norton represents that constituency. I'm not sure. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Yeah. Until Mr. Norton is removed as leader of the opposition, he speaks for the people who voted for them. For him, sorry. That is close to 50% of the population. Now, if you don't like the shoes Mr. Norton wears, you don't like the shirt, that is not the question. That's not relevant, whether he wants to shake your hand or not. So you're saying that every single person who is of African descent that voted for Mr. Norton rigged the elections. Every single person that voted for Mr. Norton doesn't believe that you should shake their hand. You could not seriously be saying that politics in Guyana is reduced to that. And then to suggest that you somehow are going to go to the masses. What you're really saying is you don't want to deal with the organized African people. You want to be able to go and buy us off and pick us off. And I mean, the insult is unbelievable. You want to come and say, hey, $250,000, you got to come vote for me, as if your entire existence as an African person can be reduced to you coming and telling me you can give me 5 cents and I should be grateful. If that is not the crudest insult to people of African descent, they are structures, and the reason why society has structures is so that we can proceed in an ordered way. Now, You expect the man on the street who's selling sweetie at the corner to sit down and argue with you to say why of the 6 gold licenses that you approve for gold export, only one is given to an African person. We can get the data from. Where does he get the capacity to begin to address you on matters of national importance in which you need real data? You can't go to the man in the street and expect that. He's too busy, or the woman. They are too busy trying to survive. Where they're going to get the time to disaggregate. That's why you have structures, you have a leader. Mr. Norton has put forward X plan. You disagree with it, but you have to deal with him. And that's why one of the reasons we should, in this multi-ethnic society, have a sort of an institution that's independent for state planning is that we can agree on those critical areas for development: education, economic planning. Education is critical. I just want to share this figure. I did share it with you at the Coffee 250. 50%, David, admitted by the government, 48 point something percent of children who go into secondary school do not finish. All right. Now, we are going into an oil and gas economy in which you either at a minimum have to have secondary education or above. So that 50% of those school leavers, and we need to start to break it down to find out whether in the African community is 60%, whether in the indigenous community is 70%.
Right.
How are you seriously participating in this new oil economy if you don't even have the educational qualifications to begin to participate? And you're not going to be left out. Because if you think you can drive past me, a Maserati, and the water throw up on me because I'm in the pavement trying to hustle, it don't go so. You just look at any society and you see the problems they have. So I hear the president saying he's going to the people, but that is just a way of avoiding dealing with the real information, data, and debate. You're saying, I don't want to have to deal with debate at a constructive level. Let me go and throw 2 feet, go down the road, pay you a little 250,000 and say, oh, you're with me, take a couple photographs, and you suddenly become champion of the Black community. And you're focusing in the Black community, you're not doing it for the Indian community, and of course, because it's given. It is at an intellectual and a real level, it is such an offensive approach. I mean, you seriously imagine if by some means Mr. Norton became president and he suddenly decided, I ain't dealing with the leadership of the Indian community, I'm not dealing with Mr. Jagdeep, I ain't dealing with Mr. Irfan Ali, I'm not dealing with the head of the Hindu society, I'm not dealing with CIOG, I'm not dealing with the other institutions in the Indian community that have done well. I don't want to deal with what's the name of the Swami who has a very successful school river. I don't want to deal with them. I going to the masses. I going down to the cane cutter. I going down to the man in the street, and I can give you a little change and say, buddy, you got to come with me, all right? Me and you, all right? Seriously, how you begin? It's if you think about it, it's probably a consequence of our poor education over the last 2 or 3 decades, that the level of discussion in this country is so low. It is embarrassing the sort of things we read about in the newspaper that pass for anything looking like a constructive approach to developing a real country. I think a lot of people have long gone past the fact that we can. I mean, it's an indictment on us that we can't. And in the face of wealth and good fortune, we still can't work out what are really minor differences for a minuscule population of less than 1 million people.
Certainly is frightening. Nigel, the response from the PPP, of course, it's not new. They've been responding like that since 1992. And the response to that response from the African Guyanese community, part of it is throwing their hands in the air. Part of it is that we can't expect this system to work for us.
I didn't hear you just now during the bandwidth blackout. I didn't quite get the question, so please.
Yeah, no, I was saying it's the response of the African Guyanese community to this latest attitude to sharing of the power, the executive power. Where does that leave the African Guyanese community?
Sorry, David. Can you repeat? I didn't hear because we had that
Yes, right. No,
interruption.
I'm saying this latest attitude by the PPP took the sharing of executive power as a form of reconciliation. Really, in the midst of everything that's going on, must be a body blow to those of us who aspire for a change situation so that our country can move forward despite our imperfections. Where does that leave the African Guyanese community? What do the leaders tell their constituents?
David, there's an assumption in what you just asked that perhaps needs to be examined. You're assuming that the leadership of the PPP are unhappy with how things are going in the society. I don't think that they're necessarily unhappy or at all. I
Mm,
think any smart politician will say what is acceptable to the whole country, but the reality is they are very, very comfortable with how things are going. So I, I don't I don't for a second think that. I mean, they know the country's divided, but it's not an issue, and it only becomes an issue when the natives get restless, because then it's an issue. Uh, so I don't think that they are concerned at all about the way the society is. I think they think it's going great. I mean, every day the propaganda says, "Look, we're doing fantastically well. We're building more roads," and the fact that they spend more money on infrastructure than they do on human development is a commentary on where they think we should be. If you don't appreciate that the biggest asset this country has is its population, and you really should be concentrating equal amounts of resources on human development, and I don't just mean kids in school, I mean human development. If we want to become a quote unquote first world society, I don't want to say Dubai, but if we want to become a society in which we have educated, mature discussions, dealing with facts and not rhetoric, and we appealing to our better nature, you have to start spending the money on human resources. I mean, think of if we have 50,000 miles of fantastic roads, but all of us, you know, moderate education or none. Ignorance will reign supreme, and we will not even be able to manage the road systems. It's we don't realize how badly off we are.
Nigel, I know you pay attention to the oil and gas industry. The government recently passed the Petroleum Activities Bill. It was wrongly criticized by the opposition because it puts too much power in the hands of the minister. What's your reaction to that law?
Again, let me just forgive me for expanding your questions. The future of this country in the immediate short term and long term, we have to develop the institutions, not the individuals who make decisions.
Yeah.
We have to develop the institutions that are going to assist us to manage this well. David, I don't care if you put Einstein as the president or the vice president, as the case may be. One man cannot make all the economic decisions for the country. Come on, seriously? Since when does knowledge reside in one person? I don't even think within the ambit of the PPP there is real debate about the economic model. So when you start, it is always a sign of weakness when you start vesting power in individuals, because all you're saying is the individual can call up somebody and say, do this, do that. And you don't have an institution that is gathering the data that leads and feeds into a group of people who are supremely qualified in a specific area to make an optimal decision for the country. One man can't make a decision for oil and gas in Guyana. If you're going to put down a gas plant, where the gas plant is going to go, you need an institution that is going to harvest all of that data. It's going to process it, analyze it, and those experts sit down and say, well, this is the advantage of where we are. That is the advantage of where we are. And we have so many uh, examples of the foolishness of the economic decisions we've made. The Berbice Bridge is built at the mouth because they wanted to avoid New Amsterdam. Now that we are oil rich, you shut down access to the banks of the river because they have to traverse the Berbice River, and that means you can't disrupt the traffic. And therefore, rather than have a 24-hour flow up and down the river, you have to open it. I mean, we can go on with the decisions that we have made that make no sense, or we made them for short-term political gain that make no economic sense. And if you had a state planning type institution that was gathering that data that allowed different views around the political and different views in terms of economics, the kind of discussion that would feed into that would not lead to the kind of decision that was made there. It's sad. So what I'm saying in short, really, is it is obvious that the minister should not get that kind of discretion. We need to start concentrating on building these institutions, and because we don't have the talent here, we have to hire that talent in while we train our own talent so that we get up. We end up with a petroleum commission. We end up with a commission that can protect the interests of Guyana, whether it's in oil and gas, or whatever area it is. That is the approach. It should be a national approach that sets up these institutions, not that the minister, because every human being has vulnerabilities. So if you want to put that kind of decision making power in one person, then all you got to do is find their weakness.
Nigel, you stressed that in the oil blocks that have been distributed thus far, not one is owned and controlled by Africans. We now have, I think, 14 new oil blocks that's going to go on auction, according to the government, this coming month. The model of the auction, does that is that hospitable to a more inclusive kind of outcome, or does it, in a sense, weeds out some people at the outset? Your thoughts,
David? Last week, the vice president in his press conference, someone sent me the clip, acknowledged that the previous oil blocks were given to only Indian people. He said it. I actually heard him say it. And he said, but that's in the past. Now we have, we got to get bonus, etc. Let's analyze that. If you acknowledge that only one sector of the community got oil blocks, and oil blocks will bring wealth. He said, oh, the investment, they haven't gotten it back because they haven't found oil. Forget all of that. If you acknowledge you, during your term of office, only gave oil blocks to one sector of the community, you are acknowledging that you took state resources and gave it to one sector of the community. What's the impact of that? What happens to the other sector of the community that didn't get it? We're going to say now that because we are rectifying this, we don't take account of our previous missteps and attempt to rebalance it. Because you see, we have to understand that there has to be rebalancing, because you can't take all the state assets, give it to your people, and then say, I made a mistake, mea culpa, but now going forward, everybody can compete in the same playing field. How? You take that asset, you make a lot of money, you go and invest, you put it in the stock market, you get people who buy shares in those blocks, and you make a lot of money. So the next time around, if you want to start bidding with a bonus of $10 million, they don't have a difficulty raising $10 million because you already give them the oil block, which they could trade and go and do it. So the African who never got an oil block, who doesn't have the same opportunity, you're then going to say to him, we now in a level playing field. Come on. It's like if you ask me at 60 to go and run 100 meters with Usain Bolt and say that, whoever wins could get the oil block. You have so impaired my economic opportunities. You have so advantaged your own supporters by the transfer of assets, state assets. I don't have any difficulty with people making money, and I'm not asking anybody to take money back away from any private person. But you cannot take the state's assets and give it to one set of people. And then 10 years down the line, after that asset is multiplied and multiplied and multiplied, say that we're now going to have a fair system without talking about rebalancing. You have to deal with it. As a matter of fact, I'm happy you said that, because Article 15 of this same constitution that the people used to like to say was Burnham's constitution, they had a chance to change it. Article 15 says this: the state shall intervene to mitigate any deleterious effects of competition on individuals or groups. The Constitution says the state, when it sees this complete imbalance between the various groups, the state shall, it doesn't say the state may intervene, it says the state shall intervene to mitigate any deleterious effects of competition. Now, for God's sake, if I'm an Amerindian and you compare my average wealth, my per capita wealth to somewhere else, the state has to intervene to protect me. If I'm an African, you admit that you have given away oil blocks to only Indian people. It's not the state may, the state has to mitigate that. Because what is the consequence of that? I mean, it's there in print. If you want to respect the foundation of the rule of law in the country, which is the Constitution, which leads to democracy, blah, 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 respect what it says. The state has to intervene to mitigate the differences. And the only way you can identify those differences is by getting disaggregated data on the impact of policies, etc., on every sector of the community. You have to have it. You can't have a discussion about development in the future if you don't have disaggregated information. Because otherwise the argument could be, like with Mocha Road, you run through, look up the African farmers and take through the back of Mocha, and you say, well, the greater benefit is we have 10,000 cars who come in down the road every day. But if the disaggregated data of that says that you have in effect destroyed the farming capacity of several people who depended on it, and that this road could have gone in another location, in another direction, and protected it, you would never know. Get up and say, look, 10,000 cars going down the road. But if you don't have the data on the impact it has had on those African families, have they broken up? Have they been had adverse social consequences? What happens to people who are farmers don't suddenly become urban people? That's not their environment. So what happens to them? The children grow up, they're no longer capable of dealing with it, and then they turn to crime and you say, oh my God, badness. If they get shot, it's okay.
Nigel, some quick questions for you, rapid response, if you will, although some of them
Sure.
are not necessarily amenable to that rapid response. The situation of backlog in our justice system is been with us forever. More and more we talk about it, lawyers talk about it, it gets worse. What are we not doing?
All right, David, to be fair to the judges and the system, there was a time where they significantly reduced the backlog. There was a process and program, and the IDB, I think, had funded a program where they significantly reduced the process. We have new civil procedure rules that allow faster trials in the civil court. The reality is that we have a complete shortage of judges. I think we're down to 7 or 8. They've been allowed to retire. And we're not appointing new judges. As you know, the judiciary is big political issues. We can't even decide and agree on the chancellor and the chief justice, and don't think that consideration doesn't filter down to the appointment of judges generally. The same sort of political nastiness that exists will continue for that. So we have had a shortage of judges. That's a big problem. On the criminal side, the reality is 2 judges, a maximum of 3 judges, sit at any assizes and start with probably 281 cases. Not humanly possible to bring that down. And every day you read of somebody killing somebody else, so you're adding new cases to the system. You have to decide what sort of society you want. And you have to decide that you need an emergency intervention in terms of resources so that you spend money, expand the judiciary, and even if you decide you're going to appoint a block of lawyers, judges, to deal with specific areas. So if you want to bring down the crime backlog, you appoint 4 or 5 judges who sit in the criminal jurisdiction for about 2 3 years, bring it down because it is unacceptable. Justice Witt, when he was here the last time, said that you shouldn't have people waiting for trial for murder for more than 6 months. We got people sitting down in prison for 5 6 7. I had one for 18 years the other day who waiting on a trial. Now
Wow.
think of what that does to you. If you get acquitted after 18 years sitting down in jail, it's difficult not to have blood in your eyes when you come out. It's difficult. So we have to decide, you see, because the law to politicians doesn't translate into the votes or
Yeah.
immediate tangible economic benefits, but you don't see the intangible in the sense of the quality of society you end up with and the level of civility or lack thereof. So that's how I would deal with that. And similarly with the civil procedure rules.
Civil
Um,
procedures.
you know, you have an intervention, you spend the resources, you get that backlog up, and then you work out. You see, if you had the data, it would tell you whether you need 20 judges at the High Court, 25, 30, to be able to keep the system running. But the appointment of judges always becomes a political thing because you're looking to see if who the judge likely to favor, and we are in a sad, sad, sad place.
The Police Complaints Authority, Justice Ramlal, dropped what I consider to be a bombshell. Obviously, it wasn't to the media because it was a one-day coverage and then they move on. But he dropped a bombshell. He basically accused the acting commissioner of police of breaking the law. And I know you have an intimate relationship with that issue of police killings because you've had to represent so many victims. What are your thoughts on Justice Ramlal's revelations?
Um, I think it was timely and appropriate. There's nothing that we didn't know. He has said it. But again, commentary on our society. If the head of the police complaints authority says that, like you said, the press don't pick it up. We don't react to it. There's no outrage. We have lost our sense of outrage that existed before in the 60s and 70s, maybe even early 80s. We had a sense of outrage. So if somebody like Justice Ramlal said that, look, the police commissioner is committing an act of illegality, the police commissioner himself would go and resign because you know, but we've reached a stage now, unless I am hitting you in your head with a 4x4, you don't pay attention to what I say. We no longer, we've lost the art of of um of being conscious or being outraged. And so he says it. The press doesn't even think it's sufficiently newsworthy to follow up. The commissioner of police continues, the minister of home affairs continues, and whatever acts Justice Rambla complained about will continue. And that's just how we are.
Nigel, I'm going to ask you to comment on an issue that, and you can say no because it has bad memories for you. I know. But have we reached the point where these constant road fatalities, have
Oh,
we reached the point of a state of emergency? Have we reached the point where this is now not just about people's personal failures, but it's a governance issue? Help me, help me. I mean,
David,
8 people over the weekend in a small society of less than a million.
8. David, I had the privilege of going to Shanghai. I can't remember how many people live in Shanghai, 30 million people. I had the privilege of going to one of the police command centers. This is in China, my friend. They can shut down and identify a criminal act in less than 4 minutes on face recognition. Traffic, the technology is there. I mean, how difficult is it to have the cameras of the correct quality identify exactly what happens? Come on. People driving at beyond the speed limit. Everybody's boring, coming in the inside, coming in the outside. All you need to do is send these people a ticket. After you get tickets, you don't want to go and pay. The next step is obvious. This is not a beyond. This is schoolboy stuff. This is a thing you'd probably give to somebody in primary school to solve it. If you have the cameras, you have the technology. If everybody has standardized number plates, you can pick it up immediately. So the second, let me give you an example in the UK and in some places in Europe. If I pass Sparendam at 3 or 4 and I arrive in Babis at 4:45, sorry, at 4:45, 45 minutes, it must mean that I had to be speeding. So the camera picks me up at Sparendam, and the camera picks me up along the way. They do the mechanics and they just do the calculations and the number, and they can get my medium speed. And if my speed is above it, you get charged. If you go before a magistrate with that evidence and you want to contest it, you're free to contest it. But if you waste the court time, you're going to pay double. And this is not, you see, unfortunately, we elevate this to a national crisis, but this is baby school stuff. This is real baby school stuff. I mean, if coming down any highway here, the recklessness is unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Nigel Hughes here tonight. Gosh, I kept you beyond the call of duty and tried to squeeze it. But Nigel, is there any issue you wish to comment on before we go? Anything that I didn't ask you about? Your closing thoughts, if there's not any special issue that you want to speak to.
It is my hope. I really hope that the political leadership of this country see where we are heading, and it is not a pleasant place. And I'm not talking about disruption and strikes and crime wave and all that. I'm just speaking about what is going to happen. Those who live outside of this country and have access to capital that can come here and invest will come here. They will get the best investment opportunities, which means that they will make the most money. All of that money will leave the country. And those that have been here and suffered will get left behind. And I just take the 50% who will not finish secondary school. They will be condemned to the most basic form of employment in their own country. So we are actually going back to the stage where they're going to continue to be security guards and maids and jobs that you would consider generating less income. And they're going to earn that income because they were never given the opportunity to develop themselves. And the resentment will build because every day you are seeing the glitter, the glamour, and people talking about Dubai. So it means you are going to sit down, excluded in your little ghetto or wherever it is, and politicians are going to run in and give you 250,000, whatever the figure is. And you are going to walk yourself into second-class citizenship in your own country. And what will happen is those that have money will buy the media and propaganda material to be able to say to you that you're better off than X, Y, and Z and say, be happy with your lot. Move along. That's where we're going.
That's where you're going. Grim, but the truth. The truth. The truth. Nigel, thanks. Thanks so much.
Pleasure. And David, thank you again for all that you do.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Brother Nigel Hughes, there as usual, profound in his thoughts, a wide range of thoughts here tonight. Let's take this material and work to turn our situation around. Ultimately, it comes down to us. Those of us who don't have institutional power will have to push the doors of the institutions. We can't give up now. We can't give up now. We can't give up now. We've come too far. We've come too far. We've survived. We survived the plantation. We survived indentureship. We survived colonialism. We survived the harshness of becoming independent in a world that wasn't made for us. And we have come this far. We can't give up. The state is powerful. The state has always been powerful. But there's a power that is stronger. That's the power of the people. We have heard that. Let's activate it. We are doing some things right. We are doing some things right. We are doing some things right. We have to accelerate. I want to thank you all tonight. I see my sister Isla Pilot. Isla, good night. Alexis Williams, Audrey Brown, Ronald Hanover, Miranda. Well, you all already tell me you all know who Miranda is. Anyhow, thank you all so much for coming out in your numbers tonight. Tomorrow night, we continue coverage of the topical issues of the day. I can't remember who my friends are going to be on tomorrow night, but we're going to be on tomorrow night, and we're going to continue to delve into these issues and to shine some light, more light on the darkness that is being urged on us. Donna Liverpool, I think, Donna, you're joining us from Suriname. Good evening. All those of you who are joining, Lawrence Harris, that's a new name. I don't see you on very often. Thank you. So true, Hector. I love the creativity. We're going to be back tomorrow night. Susan London, Archie Simon. We're going to be back tomorrow night, continue this coverage. Thanks to Nigel for helping us to clear the way so we could see through to the other side. I'm quoting there from the Venerable David Michael Rudder, the philosopher of Calypso. Tomorrow night, we're coming back to continue our mission.
That's fear? Or would there be this attitude of self-preservation and I don't care? I am just warning, if that is so, it would not be the way to go, else there would be a fracture and tear, a gulf wide enough that time and all can't repair. And it's gonna take a long time, I know. It's gonna take a lot of time to grow. And then it's gonna take time, it's gonna take love, it's gonna take trust. And it's gonna take you, it's gonna take me, it's gonna take all of us. But it's gonna take a long time, I know. Oh yeah. Yeah. All actions must eradicate traces of alienation. If we are serious about one love and a change in our nation, we must not expect meaningful change to come about overnight. Cause any change for the better of anything takes a lot of fight. And any agenda has to be transparent, it cannot be disguised. You cannot speak one thing and your action speaks otherwise. Then unity would be just a fast. No such hypocrisy ever lasts. And you would be taken to task. Then reality would lash you furious and fast. And it's gonna take a long time, I know. It's gonna take a lot of time to grow. And then it's gonna take time, it's gonna take love, it's gonna take trust. Most of all, it's gonna take you, it's gonna take me, it's gonna take all of us. But it's gonna take a long time, I know. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. All right. You must never practice the things that in the past you criticize. Cause if you do, it just helps to leave this nation more traumatized. And there's nothing worse than mistrust to create real division. And the last thing unity wants is total polarization. No political oligarchy should ever be allowed to develop. And racism, no matter how disguised, would have to stop. Don't make unity a puppy show. Just remember I told you so. It would not be the way to go. Else the darkest cloud would cover up our rainbow. And it's gonna take a long time, I know. It's gonna take a lot of time to grow. But then it's gonna take time, it's gonna take love, it's gonna take trust. And it's gonna take you, it's gonna take me, it's gonna take all of us. It's gonna take a long time, I know. It's gonna take a lot